Hello and welcome to this tutorial on the Cisco Discovery Protocol, otherwise known as CDP. CDP enables Cisco devices to learn basic information about other Cisco devices, and it accomplishes that by sending and receiving CDP messages. Now, it's important to note that CDP only works on Cisco devices, so this is a proprietary protocol developed by Cisco. So if you have a router and a switch and they're both Cisco devices, it will work. If you're using a non-Cisco device, do not expect it to work. Well, we get a lot of useful information from CDP, and it could be helpful in a troubleshooting scenario, or it could be useful when you're learning a network or perhaps working on some documentation or you're auditing a network. So we're going to go ahead and look at some of that information that's available to us via CDP, and then we'll jump into configurations, not only how to enable it, but to disable it, and there are some reasons why you want to disable it, and we'll cover those. And then we'll go ahead and we'll actually look at the show commands available to us that give us access to the information that CDP exchanges. So let's get started. So when we say the information exchanged via CDP is pretty basic, well, it really is. It's almost like meeting somebody for the first time and you learn their name and perhaps where they live and what they do. Well, here's the list of information we can learn about neighbors via CDP. And you can see it is pretty simple stuff. We start off with the host name of the neighboring device, and we can also learn what model that device is and what OS it's running. That can be very helpful when you're trying to map out a network. Related to that is a type of device. So we can learn if that neighbor is a router or a switch or perhaps an IP phone. Pretty helpful stuff. Also, we look at the local interface and the remote interface. So the local interface is the device we're actually on, that we're looking at the CDP information. And it tells us the interface that is used to learn about that neighbor. And the remote interface is the interface used on the neighbor that is used to connect to us. So we figure out which interface is used on both sides of a link. Finally, we learn about the IP address of the neighboring device, and that can be pretty useful. Before we get started at the command line, let's just take a look at our scenario. So we have a switch, and it has a single connection to a router. These are two Cisco devices. Also on that switch, we have two PCs. These PCs can represent any non-Cisco device, and we have those on there to illustrate how non-Cisco devices do not participate in CDP. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump over to a command line now. Okay, I'm at a command line on a Cisco switch, and the first thing we want to do is determine if CDP is enabled or not. So the command we want to use is show CDP. And these three lines of output, the first two tell us information about the timers, how often packets are sent, and how long does it wait in order to receive a packet from a neighbor. But the third line is what we're really interested in. It's telling us that it is in fact enabled. So that's a good sign. If CDP were not enabled, we could do a couple different things in order to turn it on. We can enable or disable CDP on a global level, meaning we turn it on and enable it for every interface on the switch, and likewise turn it off for every interface on the switch. Or we can only turn it on for specific interfaces. Likewise, you can turn it off for specific interfaces. So you have some flexibility there. We mentioned earlier there was a reason why. Well, the primary reason if you want to disable CDP is for security. You know the information exchanged with CDP messages, and if you have an untrusted device, perhaps a neighboring device that belongs to a client or another company, there's really no reason for them to get that information. So you would want to turn it off really to devices that you do not have administrative control over. The policies differ from network to network, but generally speaking, devices you don't trust, you want to disable CDP with those devices. So if we wanted to turn CDP off for the entire switch, what would we do? Well, we jump into configuration mode and type no CDP run. And if we jump out now and take a look at show CDP, it tells us pretty clearly CDP is not enabled. Let's go ahead and turn it back on, and it's the same command just without the no parameter. So CDP run. Confirm it now, and it is in fact turned on. However, we did this in global mode. See, global CDP information. Let's say there was an interface where we did not want CDP turned on. So Let's jump into one of the fast Ethernet interfaces. And the command we'd want to use here is a little bit different on the interface level. It is no CDP enable, and that turns it off for that particular interface. So how do we check it? Well, if we use the global command again, we get global information, but we can check it on a per interface level with the show CDP interface, and we jumped into 14, and you can see there's no information on there at all. If you look at an interface that CDP is enabled on, even though the interface is down, this is the information you would get. So if you see nothing in the output, you know on an interface level it's not enabled. If we want to go ahead and see all of the interfaces that CDP is enabled on, we could type the same command, show CDP interface, but just leave off the last parameter. Don't specify anything. And this will output all the interfaces that CDP is enabled on. And if I stop right after FA13, you can see then it jumps to Fast Ethernet 15, and it's not showing us 14, and that's because we disabled CDP on FA014. So just all the interfaces that CDP is enabled on. Pretty useful. The next command is show CDP traffic. And this can be useful if you're troubleshooting CDP problems. Why am I not seeing a particular neighbor or a neighbor not seeing me? It just gives us some information on the number of messages both sent and received by this particular switch. Keep in mind this is on a global level though, so it'll include messages sent and received to all neighbors, all CDP neighbors. Well, the really good command is what we're getting into now, show CDP neighbors. And this shows us the information we listed earlier of what is exchanged. So device ID is the host name, and here it just says router. Well, the connected router is using the default host name. So there it is, router. And we can see it's connected to us on Fast Ethernet 07. That's our local interface. And if you skip all the way to the right-hand side, the last column, port ID, that is the remote interface connected to us. So that is the interface on the router that is being used to connect to Fast Ethernet 07 on this switch. So that's Fast Ethernet 0 on the router. The capability column will give you a letter, and you can correspond that letter to the key right above it. So you can see R stands for router, which we know. It could have been S for switch. Also in today's networks, you'll see P for phone quite often as well. We also talked about the platform. Well, this is a router, and it's a Cisco 1720. So we learned our model information as well, just like we discussed. Well, this is good, but there's some more information. So how do we access it? And it's the same command, but with the parameter detail on the end. If we take a look at this now, this lists each neighbor we have, but with a little more information. It's easy for us to look at this here because there's just one neighbor. So if you had a bunch, you would see all of them. So you can see the device ID router. Here we have some more information, and now we know the IP address of our connected router. The platform and the capabilities, it's spelled out for us here, not just looking at the key and the single letter. The interfaces list the same information, but again, it's a bit more verbose. We do learn some OS level information here under the version. And we also learned that this particular interface is set up for duplex, and the advertisement version is version 2. So a little more information here, which can be pretty useful. If we had a bunch of CDP neighbors, it may be a little bit cumbersome to use the show CDP neighbors detail command. So instead, you could just issue the show CDP entry. And here what it's looking for is you can put the star, which would give you everything. So it's the same as the command we just issued. Or you can actually list the CDP neighbor device ID, so the host name. So our only neighbor was called router. And if we issue that, you can see we get this output. It's exactly the same output as we got from issuing the show CDP neighbors detail command, but it's just giving us this one particular entry, this one particular neighbor. Okay. So to summarize the commands we used, no CDP run will disable CDP on a global level for the entire chassis. CDP run, likewise, will enable CDP globally, so for every interface on the device. If we want to turn it off for just one particular interface, we jump into interface submode in configuration mode, and we go ahead and issue the no CDP enable command. Likewise, in the interface, if we want to turn it back on, we issue the CDP enable. So it's a little confusing sometimes between the no CDP run and no CDP enable. Just keep in mind, run is for the global level, enable is for the interface level. Also, we have the command summary of all of the show commands we issued in order to access the CDP information or learn the status of CDP. So show CDP, is it enabled or not? On a global level, show CDP interface, is it enabled or not for a particular interface? Show CDP traffic to learn about the counts of messages both sent and received on a global level. Show CDP neighbors, show us the brief output of all the neighbors and the information, the basic information we exchange and receive. Show CDP neighbors gives us all the neighbors but with more detail, and that's why we have the detail parameter on there. And then finally, show CDP entry will give us the same information that we learn via show CDP neighbors detail, but just for one particular neighbor. Okay, so we've made it to the end, and just a brief overall summary. We know that CDP is a Cisco proprietary protocol and that it can exchange some basic information between Cisco devices when CDP is enabled. And we know how to enable it and disable it, and the reason to disable it usually is for security reasons. And then finally, we took a look at all of the enable and disable options as well as all the different show commands we can use to access the CDP information. And that's it. That is Cisco Discovery Protocol. Thanks for watching.